how's it going? Welcome back to another great video with your boy the Savior. Today I'm going to be giving you my Final Fantasy 16 game review. My Final Fantasy 16 review. Oh yes, we have waited a long time for this, and this game changes things up dramatically. Okay, it's not like other Final Fantasy games. Now some fans might be concerned about the Final Fantasy 16 gameplay on offer here because it's not the same as original Final Fantasy. Instead, this is more like DMC, okay, or something more akin to an action adventure RPG more than a traditional Final Fantasy RPG. It's very focused with its combat, it's very fast paced, it's a lot more difficult with its combat, and I'm going to get into all of those reasons. But for me, personally, I think this is perfect, and it's one of the great changes I think Final Fantasy has done to make this game feel fresh and unique. Now I might look like an evil villain in my secret lair here, but this is my new setup, so let me know down below in the comments if you do like it or not. I'm trying something different here, and I think it's pretty moist, it's pretty toasty. And I will just say this before I get into my review of Final Fantasy 16. If you find yourself enjoying the video, I hope you do subscribe. It does just take 2 seconds for you guys, but whenever I get a new subscriber, I am so grateful. It means everything to me, and I appreciate the hell out of you. So just quickly hit the subscribe button, and it would mean a lot to me.
Tear you apart with my hands! Try it. Now die!
I work hard on my videos to give you the best possible content that I can. If you like philosophical videos, game retrospectives, gaming reviews, and newer content, I'm on it straight away, day one, before anyone else. I do my game reviews early so I can help you as the consumers make up your decision if it's worth buying or not. Now I do urge you to never pre-order games because that is what's destroying the industry, and I'm not like some of the shills who claim something's amazing in the previews and then does a 180 for the reviews. I base my reviews on the early gameplay and all of the extensive research that I do that's out there. So just let that be known, that is what this game review is based on. A lot of the time I do get hands-on early as well, so that's always a bonus. So you can make the best possible decision before buying a game, because nowadays games are just expensive as all hell, and the gaming industry as it stands right now is very corrupt with the reviews, with the industry, with developers and publishers releasing broken games or putting greedy microtransactions in them, or basically just lying to you with fake gameplay advertised. It's basically just a complete marketing scam nowadays. And with all of that out of the way, I do hope you enjoy this Final Fantasy 16 review. And if you do want to support me, that would be great. Check out my music. I make electronic synth music on Spotify. I'm sure you will like it. It's not like any other music. Trust me. I would appreciate any support. If you do become a member, you get access to a whole bunch of content. I've got a whole playlist just for members only, and a small donation helps keep this independent show alive. So we all love Final Fantasy and Final Fantasy games, but where does Final Fantasy 16 change the formula? Now, I'm not going to talk about story because the developers themselves are spoiling the hell out of this game with all of the stuff that they've shown, but this should be a sign for all of you that this game is polished and this game is good, because you can already play it for yourself, and they've released shit tons of content on this game already. So the new thing in Final Fantasy 16 is the summons, or the icons, okay? Now before in Final Fantasy games you would summon an ally and it would basically do the heavy lifting for you. But in Final Fantasy 16, this plays a massive role because you get these giant, crazy boss battles now with your summons, and actually each summon or icon, whatever you want to call it, okay, it changes every time, so it gives you a lot of replayability. Cutscenes will be different, the fight themselves will play out differently depending on what summon you use, and it's not like something from Elden Ring where you summon an ally and it just kind of aids you in battle. No, these are giant monsters that actually have their own cutscenes and gameplay changes, and this is vital because depending on the summon you use, like I said, the gameplay will be different, the abilities that you get also will be different. You can decide which summon you want to level up, because not only does it help your summon become stronger, but you as the player gets special attacks and abilities depending on the summon that you choose. It's important to note that this game is not for children, it's not for little baby boy gamers, okay? The AAA gaming industry for so long has treated us like just brainless dum-dums that we can't actually figure out how to play games anymore. Everything's got to be spelled out for you, but this game returns to just strong gameplay first. The story is there, but it's not as important as the gameplay. This Final Fantasy game is all about gameplay, it's all about real-time combat, and I understand that this can be a positive or a negative. And for the newcomers and not the OG sinners, I'll just quickly tell you how I do my reviews. Basically, I give you some positives and I give you some negatives. I don't give you a BS score at the end of the video because, funny enough, reviews are simply subjective opinions, and I'm tired of the gaming industry slapping on a number at the end of the video, declaring if something is good or bad. Of course, art or any type of media is a subjective experience, and I respect you guys enough that you can make up your own opinion about something, so that's why I do the reviews like I do. Now, like I said, this game is all about real-time, fast-paced combat. Think DMC, think the old God of War games before Kratos became a crusty old papa, okay, taking slack from a little soy boy. No, this is returning to good quality action gameplay where it rewards the player for thinking fast and acting, with instinct and with actual skill, believe it or not. And I really appreciate that. Even the developers themselves said they took inspiration from the old God of War games, so I think that's a cool little detail, especially when you're fighting these massive summons and these giant bosses. That's when you can really feel the inspiration from God of War, the original games, and Dragon Dogma. Now, Final Fantasy 16 has divided a lot of fans because for the first time in Final Fantasy, you don't play as a party, you don't play a group of characters, and you might have already heard this, but I think it's a pretty cool detail because for me, playing as one character makes me feel far more immersed in the world and the character themselves. So I think it was a nice touch, and instead of jumping between different characters in your party, companions act more as just side support. You don't get personal control over them. However, there are abilities for your companions, and basically your companions will actually grant you extra bonuses and stuff like that. And your main companion, your little dog, actually is very important when it comes to combat because you have to manage your companions, and there are systems in place where you can allow the game itself to manage all of that for you. And what I find interesting is because they kind of took out the party mechanic, what they did add are time jumps, and basically your character that you play as, Clive, you actually go through his life as a teenager, as a young adult, and when he's actually more matured. And I think that's a nice touch. It does remind me of older games like Fable, The Lost Chapters, and I really love that sense of progression with one character, seeing them develop as they age. It just makes you feel far more connected to the characters, I find, in any video game, like something like Fallout 3. Although Fallout New Vegas is perhaps a better game, because the character interaction and the way you see that character develop, changing from a child to a teenager to then an adult, it just makes you far more connected to the character. So I think what they did with the story here is super interesting. I'm not going to spoil anything, but it's far more dramatic and dark and mature, and I think that's a really cool touch. But don't get it twisted, okay? This game, even though it is far more focused on the gameplay aspect, this is still very much a story-driven game, and that's especially true when it comes to some of the gameplay philosophy and mechanics that they chose, because this is a linear story adventure. It does have side quests, it does have different objectives, and many different things you can do to extend your playtime, like a little arcade mode where you can actually get different scores and then compare yourselves to other players. There's a lot going on here, but the story is still the main focus. You know, you will be fighting a lot and then there will be a cutscene. So the difficulty, like I said, this game doesn't hold your hand. You do actually have to be good at this game. You do actually have to dodge attacks. You can't just, you know, soak up a load of damage. But the way they've tackled difficulty here, I find super interesting. It reminds me of something like From Software or Elden Ring. Instead of, you know, giving an easy difficulty, a medium difficulty, or hard difficulty, they've focused their gameplay so it's actually, you know, fair and responsive with one base difficulty, but the way you can basically make it more easier or more difficult is by your equipment. And you can choose at the start of the game a story mode, which will basically give you a bunch of OP equipment to begin with, or you can just play the game straight how it's supposed to be. If you're not a little, you know, if you're not a game journalist or if you don't work for IGN, I highly recommend that you play the base difficulty, not the story mode. The way they implemented equipment here also does remind me a lot of games like Elden Ring and stuff like that. So I do like the fact that the RPG gameplay here is much more focused when it comes to combat more than, you know, choices in the narrative or something like that. And I do love RPGs like that, but I do feel they went for a more Western style approach to the RPG formula instead of the traditional Final Fantasy JRPG. So like I said, that might turn off some OG fans, but I personally find this very refreshing, and that's what we need in the gaming industry, is games that change the formula, that take risks, that obviously are inspired by other different games, but they do something unique with their own spin on it. So yes, there is a lot of fighting in this game, so they need to keep that interesting, and how they do that is basically by the abilities and the skill trees that you unlock. Yes, it's the standard skill tree, level up, put a point in a skill tree, but what makes this a little bit more interesting and unique is the fact that, like I said, you get these giant, massive boss battles, and you can choose what summon you want, and then you basically gain the ability of that summon yourself, and you can cycle these powers as you play. You can only use one at a time, bear in mind, but you can cycle them and basically do some crazy combos, and that's where it reminds me of something like Dragon's Dogma or DMC, and I think that's what keeps the gameplay fresh. There's so much, you know, actual choice when it comes to the gameplay and the combat choices here, and the abilities that you choose just all feel so amazing. They feel overpowered without being too overpowered, and I just think they balanced it perfectly. There's a lot of particle effects going on, which can be a little bit annoying, but it does make you feel like a true badass, and I think they just implemented the combat pretty well here. At times, it does feel like a little bit arcadey, but I think that was the kind of approach they were going for. So some of the abilities you might get are teleportation from one of the summons, or you might be breathing fire like a dragon, something that we've seen before in games like Elden Ring, and you can, you know, basically become a tank. There are so many different unique abilities. I can't spoil them all. Like I said, I've only played the early version of the game. RPGs now are just very recycled when it comes to the open world. You need a unique open world to actually make it stand out these days, and that's very difficult to achieve. So I like the fact that they went for a more linear story approach with open sections, okay? So if you've played games like Metro Exodus, so you choose from a menu where you want to visit, and basically these areas are pretty giant, but they are, at the end of the day, just levels. It's not a dynamic open world, but they still feel massive. It's not like one linear path. So there is some exploration, but that is where I do feel the negative does come in. Instead of like previous Final Fantasy games going off and you see something cool, you can just go and explore it. There is still exploration here, but it is definitely a lot more restrictive, I would say, and that is a negative, I would say. Another cool feature they've added, I know I'm comparing it to a lot of games, but that's because Final Fantasy 16, instead of going for traditional, Final Fantasy route, it has taken inspiration from so many games, like I said, God of War, Dragon's Dogma, Monster Hunter, Elden Ring. These games I feel best capture the kind of essence that Final Fantasy is going for, the combat and the kind of gameplay mechanics on offer. Another thing to keep you busy is basically you can get side objectives where you basically go up to a mission board and you can accept jobs kind of like Monster Hunter, I would say. These jobs usually consist of, taking down a certain enemy type or, a boss or something like that, and you will get, extra XP, some bonus items and, skills, abilities, stuff like that. Standard stuff, but I do feel it does break up the standard story, linear progression, and that is needed for this type of game because it's not a massive game. Don't expect to be putting hundreds and hundreds of hours into this like other big open world RPGs, and honestly I think that's refreshing, and I do like that they went that approach. So when you're not doing missions or doing the main story, you are actually just relaxing, upgrading your gear, buying new weapons and abilities and stuff like that in the hub area. Now this does kind of remind me of Elden Ring, where you do go to a selected hub area to level yourself up and to buy equipment, and it's just a nice break. That's where you can, have conversations with different characters and stuff like that. And some people might say that's kind of some people might say that kind of breaks the flow of, the combat, and it's not as immersive as, just having characters kind of littered throughout the story in, little towns or something like that. But returning to somewhere that feels comfortable, that feels like a home, that's very important. And what makes hub areas in games special, I kind of want to do a separate video on that actually. It's quite an interesting topic. They need to capture that essence of, I think the best one for me personally is Dark Souls 2, that hub area in Majula. You need a sense of comfort, you need that atmosphere of warmth and safety, and Final Fantasy 16 gets that perfectly. And that's because the combat is so difficult and it is quite brutally challenging compared to other games in the Final Fantasy series, and it's a lot more darker. That kind of contrast, I think, is what makes this game special, because it doesn't feel like a Final Fantasy game, and you do get that sense of respite that you need for that to work. I do hope you are enjoying this Final Fantasy 16 review, my Final Fantasy 16 game review. I did work hard on this, and I would appreciate, like I said, if you did subscribe. It would mean so much to me. Thank you so much. Check out my other philosophical videos, my other game retrospectives. But honestly, just telling you how I feel about this game, what I've seen and what I've tried, this is definitely a good game, and I feel the combat is what nails it. It has the elements of JRPG and the elements of a Final Fantasy game, but it mixes it with more conventional Western RPG, gameplay and real-time combat. I just think this makes this game far more accessible to, a wider audience, and it's just fun. It's just more fun and engaging when you're doing the actions yourself, personally, I think, but that's down to preference after all. Now, this game is only on PS5, it is only a next-gen game. Of course, the graphics are nice if you care about that. Honestly, I think graphics always come, last. I'm so tired of big studios and developers only caring about graphical detail, forcing that down our goddamn throats. That's what's destroying the gaming industry, if you ask me. But luckily, this balances both perfectly. Now, it is only on PS5 for 6 months, but then it might come to Xbox and PC. So this game will probably only take you around 40 hours to see pretty much everything, and unless if you want to collect everything, do all of the side little things, I would say that's probably what you'll get from this. And now I'm just going to give you a few negatives to end this, because I think it's important to talk about the negatives. So the first negative is the FPS. Sometimes it does drop, especially when you are swabbed? That's not a word, savior. Especially when you are mobbed. Yes, English. When you are mobbed by a lot of enemies, and especially in the big boss battles, if there's a lot of on-screen particle effects, It does sometimes tank the frame rate a little bit, nothing dramatic, but just be warned if you are sensitive to that. The story is also sometimes conflicting, I would say. Sometimes I feel like it doesn't know exactly what it wants to be. I do feel there is a good narrative here and it's all performed well. Of course, it does have that classic Final Fantasy cheesiness. It wouldn't be the same without it, but at sometimes it just, I don't know, it just feels a little bit convoluted, I would say, at points. And the monster designs, although interesting, and the bosses, I just feel like it could be a little bit more inspired. That's all. And the final negative, the one that gets me the most, and the one I absolutely hate, I just want it to die, okay? It needs to die. Modern day gaming has no need for this BS. It just screams lazy gameplay design. It screams that they think you're a lazy dum-dum that just wants to watch a movie instead of play a game, and that is quick time events, okay? There are far too many quick time events in this game, especially with the boss battles and the summons, and honestly, it kills it for me, a lot of it, and it takes me out of the game. I'm not saying the game is bad because of it, that would be crazy, but honestly, it does negatively impact the experience dramatically, I would say, so just be warned. And that is my Final Fantasy XVI review. I do hope you enjoyed the video, my sinners. If you do want to become a wise boy, make sure you do subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a great day. Peace out.